Hey everybody, welcome to this video. It's the continuation in the New Testament series. We're halfway through Matthew chapter 14 and we're carrying on from verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So what's going on here? Well, we learnt in last week's video, didn't we, that Jesus has just heard about the beheading of John the Baptist. And isn't it interesting that Jesus' reaction is to go away to a solitary place, to spend time with God, to spend time in prayer. And of course, if Jesus, the Son of God, sees it as important to get away on his own and spend time with God, then what a model to us that is. And yet look at the way he reacts. People follow him and he sees them, and obviously he's got a plan and he's having a hard day. You know, he's just heard about John the Baptist being beheaded. But look how he responds. He had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, this is a challenge to us, I think, about how we respond when our plans are interrupted or our plans change. I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at this. If I have got a plan to do something, I get very frustrated when that plan changes. If somebody's agreed to do something, to meet up or whatever it is, and it doesn't happen, it really frustrates me. But ultimately, that's about pride, isn't it? That's about kind of thinking, you know, I'm more important than anybody else. And Jesus here, he has compassion on the people. And it's a great example to us, a great challenge to us about when we have plans, still having room, having wiggle room in those plans, so that if we see a need, if we see somebody in need, we can stop and meet that need. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." What I love about this is that the disciples are being very practical. They're not sort of being mean. They're just saying, look, there's loads of people here, and you know they're going to need to eat. So you need to say to them, look, go on, off you go and eat. And Jesus' response, though, is they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. And to me, this really ties in with the previous lines on compassion. It just makes me think that if you see a need, you should meet it. There's something about if you see someone in need, it's no good just thinking, oh, poor them, someone else needs to help them. We should think, no, we'll help them. We will be the solution to the problem that we see. So they responded very practically, but Jesus responded with this challenge. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. This is the famous bread and fishes miracle. And what's going on? What is going on here is that God uses, I think this is a great story about how God uses what we have. You know, a lot of us feel that like we are too messed up for God to use us. We sort of think, God couldn't use me, I'm a mess. But this is a great story about if you give God the little you have in life, he can do something amazing with it. He can do more than you could ever imagine with it. But you've got to be willing to give it to God in the first place. And with just a little bit of bread and fish, God produces an amazing meal for all of these thousands of people. You know, in the culture of the time, they only counted the men. So there were probably, you know, 10, 15,000 people there when you include the women and the children. What I love about this story, and I think it tells us something so important about the character of God, is verse 20. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And I love this. One of the names for God is El Shaddai. the God of more than enough. And I love this idea that God doesn't just provide enough for them, He provides more than enough. Their cup runs over, to quote another Bible verse. They have more than enough, overflowing, abundance, brimming over. So you start off with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, but when you finish, even the leftovers that they're going to throw away are 12 basketfuls. And it just speaks to me of the nature of God, the lavish love, the um, overflowing love of God, which, we have to constantly look at the Bible to get an idea of what God is like and not just put our own limitations on God. I heard a great saying, God created man in his own image and man returned the favour. We so often create an image of God as we imagine him to be. And one of the things we might imagine is that he's stingy, that he's tight, that he's angry, that he would not, be generous. But when we actually look at the reality of the Bible here, there's loads left over. He is a generous God who gives us more than enough. And it shows us something so amazing about God. Then we move on to Jesus walks on the water. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get inside the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up onto the mountainside by himself to pray. So here we see that when Jesus was going to spend some time alone in prayer and was moved with compassion by the people, he didn't stop and change his plan. He stopped and healed the sick and fed them with a miracle, and then he went on to pray. How many of us would make God a priority so that even on a very busy day, bad news about John the Baptist being dead, all of these people, wanting to be healed and the miracles, but he still makes a priority to spend time alone with God. A massive, massive direction to us that no matter how busy our day, we should be spending time alone with God. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, what is great about this story, the walking on the water story, another very famous story, a few things that I really like about it. The first thing is that we see in verse 30, so Peter gets out of the boat and he's walking on the water and coming towards Jesus. You get the sense that he's looking at Jesus. But in verse 30 it says, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, 'Lord, save me.'" Now the message here is quite clear. Don't take your eyes off of Jesus and look at the storms of life. Don't look at your situation that you're in and let it make you fear. Look at Jesus. Keep your eyes on God. And you know what? He begins to sink. And how does Jesus react? He could let him sink, couldn't he? He could say, "Oh, you idiot, if you didn't trust me, it's your own fault." But no, look at verse 31. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Immediately. God doesn't let us down and leave us to sink because of our lapses in faith, which are very real and very ordinary and very human. He immediately reaches out and saves us. It's amazing how often God could just let us down or kind of say, "Oh, well, stuff you, then you've made your decision," but he reaches out to us. And then you look at the way that they reacted. Those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now this is interesting because in Matthew 8, as we saw in a previous video, Jesus calmed the storm when they were in a boat, but it's almost like they've forgotten about that. That was when Jesus was asleep in the boat, and they said, "Oh, can you help us? We're all going to die." And he calmed the storm. But also, these moments that we have with God, where He calms the storms in our life, where He saves us and walks on water, does something miraculous in our life, they confirm and strengthen our faith. And that's something that I think is really important, that we remember those great miracles and moments in our life where God has done something big. The disciples reacted, "Truly, you are the Son of God," and our reaction should be the same. A lot of people will look at this story and criticize Peter. Oh, he doubted, and his lack of faith was the problem. But we have to remember that Peter was the only one who actually got out of the boat. And I think it's quite an interesting story, this, in terms of if you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. You've got to take that step of faith. You've got to do something to see God in the miraculous. There's a line of Christian thought that is kind of like, if you're just doing if you're living a life that takes no risks and does nothing that requires faith, you sort of just have your everyday life, don't do anything beyond the kind of ordinary, then you're not going to walk on water. You're not going to have those miraculous moments. There is a sense that we need to step out and do things in faith that we could only get through with God's help. And it's not to say you can be stupid and be reckless, but be willing to do things that in the natural we couldn't actually do. To do things that we think, I need a miraculous touch of God. I need God's help in this situation. If I don't get it, I'm going to sink. And that's a place where God meets us. The disciples who stayed in the boat, they didn't walk on water. They didn't take the risk. But Peter took the risk. And there's something about taking a risk as a Christian that can be so fruitful. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So many people come to Jesus for healing, and you have to wonder, did these people actually want to connect with God? Did they want to become followers of Jesus, become Christians, or did they just want to be healed and then walk away? And I'm sure it's a mixture of the two. But Jesus healed them anyway. He had compassion on all of these people, and it's a great example to us. I hope you found this video useful. Please do subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.